Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webcast. Today, we're going to be covering the latest release of SolarWinds Observability Self-Hosted 2025.1. The release was made generally available on February 11th. And my partner and I here are going to go over what's in it and why we're so excited about it. Let's just start with some introductions. My name's Erik F. I am a product marketing manager here at SolarWinds, and I focus on the self-hosted solution.
And I'm Chad Every, one of the product managers that helps cover the whole SolarWinds platform. So glad to be here.
Yep, that's it. That's us. Before we get going, I just a couple of housekeeping things. I see people are in the chat, so obviously you know about that. There's also next to that, there's a tab for Q&A. And since the chat can be pretty lively, I would encourage everybody, if you do have questions, and I encourage you to ask them, because we have a number of product experts monitoring the chat, and they're standing by to answer questions. So that's a good reason to be here. I would encourage you doing them in the Q&A section. That way it'll be easier for us to pick them out of the chat. So that's number one. Number two is we want to start with just a quick poll just to get a sense of who we're talking to. So I've just published a poll. We have just a question about where you are with, for those of you who are customers, where you are with your solutions. Are you on self-hosted, or are you still working on Orion modules? So I'll give you guys just a moment to answer that. So the agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to start by going over our general product development strategy, and then we will be recapping 2024. We had 3 releases in 2024, and we'll just kind of briefly go over the key things that were added, the updates, and the features that were released last year. And then we'll turn to this release, and we'll go over what's new in that. We'll have kind of a little bit of a deep dive on total cost of ownership, because that is a critical piece of what drives us and what drives the product team in terms of how we think about our product. Obviously, we want it to be, a cost-effective solution. So total cost of ownership is top of mind for us. And then Chad will take us through a demo of the latest release, and he'll show off some of the key features that we'll be pointing out. And then once that's over, we'll give you a little bit of an insight into what we're working on for the rest of this year and moving forward with the observability solution. And then we'll try to leave time for Q&A, so that if you guys have any questions that are generated during the presentation, that you'll be able to get answers to those while you're here. Okay, so looks like, yeah, okay. Yeah, most of you are a release or two behind. I mean, that makes sense. Let me just give you one more poll, if you'll indulge me. Just again, to get a better sense of who we have with us today. And while you guys are responding to that, we can move forward. It's not dilly-dally. Okay, so we'll start off with our product development strategy. This slide shows the 5 key areas of focus that really drive everything that we're doing with our observability solutions. Hybrid IT visibility, I think it's no secret that the vast majority of IT environments are some form of hybrid. And, we know that from talking to your customers. We know that from looking at the market and watching industry trends. I mean, it's been this way for some time, and I think it's going to continue to be that way for a while. So we focus on our observability solutions, providing, that end-to-end full stack visibility from all the way from on-prem up into the cloud and everything in between. So that's a primary focus of this self-hosted solution. For AI ops and automation, that obviously is a hot topic, especially if you're talking about generative AI. Um, we're we are very committed to implementing AI solutions, as they make sense. We we as an organization do take a very deliberate approach to implementing AI ops, especially generative AI, and we want to make sure that we do it in a way that is deliberate, secure, and ethical. So that's kind of what guides us in that realm. Um, Device support, you will see this in the presentation coming up in the next couple slides, that we are really focused on expanding device support coverage uh, as quickly as we absolutely can. And we added a lot last year, and we're going to continue to add more support this year. This is really a key area of where the product team has been focused. So, and the other thing to point out here is that the product team looks to you guys, our customers, for feedback. If there's a device that's not supported that you want to see supported, that's what the product team looks at first, in terms of looking at the thwack feature requests and things like that. We really do use that as a guide for prioritizing which devices we add and in what order. So your feedback is critical to that. But that's a big piece of what we're doing right now. Total cost of ownership, I won't dwell on this, but I mentioned it before. We're going to dive a little more deeply into it with some polling. We have some expanded polling capabilities and scaling capabilities that we're excited about in this latest release, and we'll dig into that a little bit. And then, of course, user experience. We're constantly looking at improving the dashboards, adding to the GUI, and just basically doing everything we can to make the ability to use the tool as seamless and as easy as possible. So that is the general overview of our product strategy. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Chad, and he'll walk you through the next couple of slides.
Awesome. Sounds good, Erik. So this slide, we're going to focus, and I'm not going to cover all of the things here. So this is kind of just a 2024 recap. So we had 3 major releases that we had. Some pretty big items that came out in those releases. So it definitely would encourage everyone to go look at the release notes when you have time to get the full scoop of all the things that we did. But, we're kind of focusing into kind of 4 main categories. Like we have cloud monitoring. So we're continuing that story of expanding cloud entity support in the platform. So adding, managed database, hosted database instances that are there, both for Azure and AWS. We're working on expanding device support for new vendors, new models, or just vendors that have increased in popularity over the years with our customer base. So things within the SD-WAN space, having a lot more support within wireless vendors, and then also kind of expanding our storage array support with new models that are there. And sometimes it could just be repurposing existing storage array models, because some vendors move from an older methodology of pulling arrays to more API focused. So we're doing that. User experience is another big topic. So we're kind of trying to evolve the UI, and a lot of that is kind of geared towards the modern dashboard front. So adding things like tabs and global filters and breadcrumbs, we're just the start of what we're doing. So there's some more exciting things that we'll showcase going forward in this year. And then maps, kind of also another big GUI item that we're doing, trying to increase all the different feature sets that customers are wanting in this kind of intelligent maps feature. And then just kind of expanding the story around anomaly-based alerting and our kind of SecOps story. For scalability, kind of in that TCO, we're trying to increase for customers that are on our observability self-hosted offering. They now have more capacity within their additional polling engines. So they can scale up to higher levels of elements. So 72,000 for S&P version 2, 60,000 for S&P version 3, which is higher. We were at a 48,000 element count before, and so that's increased. And then we're making some pretty exciting changes around high availability and how we can create and modify the HA pools that we have out there. So Erik, let's go to the next slide. And so this is kind of probably a main focus of what we're going to be talking about during this particular webinar. And again, definitely not enough time to go through all the features. So definitely, again, encourage you to go check out the release notes for the 2025.1 release to see what's going out there. Some of the big categories, we're now introducing support for Google Cloud, specifically with their Google Compute Engine. So more of the Cloud VM story that we've had with Azure and AWS. And we'll kind of go through really a demo of all of these kind of features that we'll highlight here, but then added more cloud entity support within Azure with Azure App Services and block storage, more on the AWS side, around that hosted database story and load balancing. And then that scalability, again, we went from 72,000 elements last year. Now we're bumping that up to 100,000 elements for S&P version 2, 72,000 for S&P version 3. And then we've within the HA GUI. User experience continues to evolve with modern dashboards, knock mode, dark theme, continued improvements with intelligent maps. We're looking to get default polling into just WinRM instead of WMI. And then device support continues to expand, right? So more things for Aruba, Fortinet switches, moving also towards some API-only based approach to monitoring some networking devices. And then again, continued expansion on storage arrays, which is great. The TCO story is one that we actually wanted to highlight real quick, and we'll spend just a few minutes on this slide kind of talking about what that means as we talked about increasing the scalability of a single polling engine and then encompassing some new features with high availability and how that can actually affect a particular deployment in a really positive way. So this kind of top level diagram, if I were a customer and I had a fairly large amount of elements, just shy of 300,000, traditionally we would require you to have 6 polling engines to cover that particular load. And then if you also wanted high availability, it was a 1-to-1 ratio. So you would have had then 6 additional HA servers to cover that. And that's 12 total servers. You're still monitoring quite a bit of infrastructure, but that's also a pretty high administrative overhead in all these different servers. You have Windows licensing costs. And what we've been trying to do is figure out how can we make this easier for any admin, especially for those with larger deployments, to just make this easier. So one, with increasing the element count from that 48,000 element mark to the 100,000 element mark, right? We're able to actually shrink the 6 original polling engines down to just 3 within the same coverage. And so we're decreasing that significantly. And then with high availability, instead of only having a 1-to-1 ratio of active to standby, we now offer a many-to-many ratio. So in this case, if you wanted, you could have your 3 primary engines all in a pool together with 1 standby HA server. So now instead of the 12 original servers, you could actually have just 4. And that's a pretty significant reduction in deployment needs for the platform. So we're really excited to get to this point. The cool thing with that high availability is, maybe from a risk standpoint, maybe just 1 standby server isn't enough for your particular needs. And you could say, maybe we'll have 3 active and 2 standby. Or if you wanted direct coverage, right, you could still go 3 active and 3 standby. You get that flexibility now to figure out what does that HA pool look like and how does it behave and what's best for the scenarios that I'm in as a user here. So that's been a pretty positive experience, and we've been getting some really great feedback with our customer base around those areas. So I think we'll go into the demo now. So the one part I wanted to focus on the demo particularly, I'll start with kind of the cloud-based items that we're working with. I'm actually going to go to where those get set up originally. So just in settings, there's going to be an area for cloud infrastructure monitoring. And so this is where we've always had the Azure and AWS setup, but now with this 2025.1 release, this is where we've added the Google Cloud. So regardless of what provider you're using in this case, you'd be able to come and select any one of these, and then you follow this wizard, and what that's just going to really do is prompt for the specific credentials to call into these vendor APIs to get the data out. So it's great because we'll walk through that eventually get to say, well, what entities do I want to support? And then at that point, it's kind of set it and forget it. We can kind of just monitor all of those things from there. To go into the Google Cloud aspect, since this is kind of their compute engine, though this is the Cloud VM story that's there. So you'll notice that there's going to be a new cloud dashboard just for GCP. That's kind of the page that I'm sitting on right now. This is where, we'll be able to see high level what is going on in that Google Compute Engine. We'll be able to drill into specific cloud VMs and have the same level of data and detail that we had with the Azure and AWS side. So I can see the performance data, I can get configuration information about the VM, I can see the performance stats around network utilization and CPU. And that if you already have, say, existing alerts or reports that encompasses aspects of cloud, now you can start tying in the GCP stuff into that equation. So it's just kind of rounding out that whole experience for monitoring the cloud with Google. We do plan to get more cloud entities with Google that we'll kind of touch on near the end of the demo here. For the AWS and the Azure side, so kind of focus on some new entity support around the blob storage stuff. And so that will show in your Azure dashboards under the storage tab. And then you can always drill into any of the particular entities themselves to get data. What's great about all of these cloud items is there's always been some aspect of cloud monitoring in the platform, but it used to be more script-based, tend to require maybe a little more care and feeding. With all this cloud entity stuff that we're coming out with, it is super easy to set up and super easy to manage. So that's where we kind of sat on that original add a cloud account screen. Now I can go add account, put the API credentials in, and as you add or remove cloud entities, you add more blob storage or you add more cloud databases or more cloud VMs. That's more or less kind of elastic, right? We'll grow and shrink depending on what that account sees automatically. And so you'll kind of get all the details around, a blob storage, or if I wanted to go into the AWS side and get information around the kind of the host database. So we have kind of the hosted Microsoft SQL database, but then we've added support for the other relational type databases that are out there. So the kind of the MySQLs, the Postgres, the Oracles that are out there. If you're kind of using that database as a service offering, now we're going to be able to come in and you'll see the database in kind of just a high level summary page. But again, I can go click into a particular hosted database instance and now pull all this data back. And nothing had to be customized to build these dashboards or screens, right? You just added the cloud account, said that you wanted to monitor that particular cloud entity. And then, this is data that we're all just going to be able to pull back natively within the tool. So again, some super great feedback that we've received from customers, just rounding out that cloud story and vision that we have. To maybe shift towards some of the other areas that we've come out with in 2025.1 is looking at that high availability deployment. So I'm actually going to move to a lab because our public facing demo doesn't let me get into all of the settings that I want to show for this particular use case here. So what I have is, I have a main server stood up, and then I basically have 4 additional polling engines. 2 are actually in an HA pool, just as kind of that traditional active standby. And then I have 2 just individual polling engines that are just part of my deployment. And so these could have nodes being monitored and assigned, but where we kind of talk about that, flexible high availability pool, where now instead of that 1-to-1 ratio, we can have that many-to-many ratio. So what that looks like is I could either create a pool from scratch if that's what was needed, or if I just took an existing pool and we'll go ahead and edit that on the screen. This particular page has changed a little bit from the previous page. We tried to modify it to make one just better layout for what's there, and then to accommodate some of the changes that we've had. So one of the things I'll talk to before I try and add anything is we've added a toggle. So, we've always had, when you set up high availability, you can say, you can have a VIP, that virtual IP address, or a VHN, that virtual host name, that can be managed by SolarWinds. So in a failover event, you could have SolarWinds maybe update that floating IP address, or maybe update DNS records so that the host name, the virtual host name, follows suit. Now we've actually given users an option to turn this off. And so if you turn that off, you typically, what that means is you're going to maybe bring your own load balancer to the equation. And so that allows customers to set that up without having a requirement to configure a VIP or virtual host name in SolarWinds if maybe they're not going to use it. When you go to add other types of servers, I can come into the list and it basically says, okay, well, here's what's available that isn't already part of a high availability pool. So I can actually go choose these and go ahead and add them into the mix. And now, right now I have 4 servers, which is basically kind of a 3-to-1, 3 active, 1 standby, and we'll save that out. One item that I will mention is, when you add more than just a 1-to-1 ratio, we do disable the VIP and virtual host name by default. And I'll kind of explain the reasoning behind that. In case I'll just maybe call it VIP here, but if I had a virtual IP address, it technically isn't going to be floating active across all 3 of the active nodes at once. So this really pertains to your inbound data collection. So if you're sending NetFlow, syslog, SNMP traps to a particular engine, you could send it to a VIP. But if that VIP only lived on a single server, what wouldn't be necessarily apparent is what server it would be on. And then it's not a great story if you're sending a lot of data. And so this really says, if I have this many-to-many HA pool configuration, this really becomes hey, why don't you just have a load balancer in your environment, create a VIP there, put these pools as members behind it, and then your inbound collection, that NetFlow, syslog, SNMP traps, can then just round robin between that pool, and it becomes a lot easier to manage. This doesn't affect, though, any of the outbound polling, which is probably the majority of what these engines are already doing. So the outbound polling is like I'm monitoring a device through SNMP or WMI, or I'm monitoring particular applications, or I'm monitoring cloud entities that are there. That's all initiated from one of the SolarWinds servers outbound to some endpoint in your infrastructure being monitored. That doesn't change at all with kind of this toggle here. So if I were to finish this real quick, just a summary page, I can go ahead and click finish, and then it comes back, and then now it's kind of built this particular pool with my 4 members that are there. And we've basically set this up so you can actually have, I think, up to 15 total servers in a single pool at a time. And then, you have the ability to say, well, maybe I need X number of active ones and Y number of standby ones. And that gives, just some pretty cool deployment options and flexibility that are there. To move on to some of the UI changes that we've done. So kind of that newer dashboarding framework, this modern dashboards, something that we've really started to pick up more priority with. And so, in last year, some of the main things, we added the ability to have different tabs across the top, similar to what the traditional or legacy UI could do with the vertical tabs. So now you can have a dashboard that has multiple types of tabs to show different types of data that's out there. We did add the ability to have knock mode. And so you'll kind of notice that there's this action, we call it an action menu, but what this does is allows you to do things on this particular page. And so refresh, and then there's this enter knock view option. So, if you had this summary page and it was on a TV or a projector, or, something that was just always on in the area that you're in, so everyone can get status of your infrastructure, now you could build this in a modern dashboard, come and enter that knock mode. And then what this will do, it'll rotate through those tabs, and you get to define the frequency of that rotation. And as you just kind of go through it, right, you can come to the top right, and eventually you can go ahead and say, hey, let's just go ahead and we'll exit the knock mode. One of the other items that we did, and I'm actually going to go ahead and edit this particular dashboard. So when we look at some of the dashboard settings, you can come into this edit knock view settings. That's where you'll enable it. You can choose the rotation. But this one, we said, let's actually add a dark theme to this particular view. So maybe when it's on that TV or projector, that dark theme is really where we want this to show. That white space, it isn't what people are wanting. And so we said, well, let's go actually enable that. We'll hit apply and we'll click done editing. And then what happens is anytime this knock mode gets launched, it actually will convert it into a dark theme. And so the reason we're kind of doing this dark theme is definitely something that we're going to roll out more into the platform. But what we wanted to do is have a kind of controlled experience that we said, most people, when they do dark theme, they have a large TV, and if it's a lot of white, right, that's going to be not a great experience. I'm in IT, I like dark theme on just about anything. And so having this is a much better experience for those larger screens. And then,
Chad, sorry to interrupt. Before we move on, can we just take a moment to appreciate what we're looking at here? For those of you who have been with SolarWinds for some time, the dark theme has to be one of the most requested features of all time. So, although this is just a beginning, the team is definitely looking at ways to expand the dark theme further into other dashboards. But this it's just pretty special. So I just wanted to have a moment to just think about it.
Yep. Yeah. And the reason we kind of, like I outlined, we chose knock mode specifically for dark theme, so that we could look at, see what's happening, get all the feedback from users on that experience. And then we're going to be working later on this year to roll dark theme out to more of modern dashboards without requiring it to be in knock mode view. So that is definitely coming. The last part I'll talk to just kind of maybe goes quickly to some of the device support. So, as I come to add particular devices, we've seen a shift over the years where, SNMP for networking devices was always the norm. That's just what everyone did. And that's still the case for a majority of the players out there. But we've also seen a big shift for customers that will couple SNMP with their own API for data. And what that means is now there's two different ways to get data, and there's sometimes where some data is only available on one side and not the other. So as we are looking at ways to better support devices that are out there, so this orchestrator API, we're continuing to add more device support into this category. And this is where I can come in here, choose the API route, and now start collecting data. Meraki was the first one that we worked with. That one was maybe a little more obvious because they were almost exclusively API, very little SNMP. Their SNMP has grown over the years, but that one was unique several years ago when they kind of came into the market. Now we're having the ability to do API polling for a lot of other types of vendors. And then we're now kind of including the ability for some of those vendors to maybe just be API polling. And there's some use cases out there where, maybe you don't have direct access to that device, over SNMP through traditional means. And maybe the API is the only method to do that. And that kind of, again, allows you to still monitor that data, still get metrics and performance and health and fault tolerance data. And now it's just all done through the API. So you did right. You're just putting in the API information, choosing what to pull, and then going from there. Yeah, so this is the part where we kind of almost like a teaser slide. Like this is stuff that we're going to be working on building in the future. Some of this is already in active development, so you'll see it in the near term. Some of this might be towards the end of the year, but some of the big things that we're working towards is, again, that cloud story, making sure we just have more cloud entity support, figuring out, what particular cloud entities are important to users, ranking those, figuring out how do we get better parity across all the cloud providers. So again, kind of increasing that GCP story to encompass more of what's there. User experience definitely growing, so we're going to make more improvements to map. I kind of already talked a little bit about, just making sure that dark theme is available for all of modern dashboards going forward. Some of the other big items around that kind of user experience, it does go to sometimes TCO, sometimes just maintenance stuff, but like that reducing downtimes during upgrades. This is the one that we've been working a lot behind the scenes. So in every release, there's always improvements that are made that are more core to the base that maybe aren't something that you put inside of a release notes, but those improvements happening. And what happens is now those have compounded enough And we're actually going to start making some noticeable changes going forward. So that reducing downtime, customers are always kind of asking for that zero downtime upgrade. We're definitely trying to shrink the downtime affected during upgrades. And as you get closer to zero, the complexity kind of grows exponentially. So what we're looking at doing is, with high availability, if I have an active standby, or maybe I have many active servers and a standby or a couple standbys, when I go to run an upgrade, what we'd like to do is say, we have to upgrade the main server, and we're going to have to do some bits inside the database to upgrade things there. That part is something that might still require some downtime. Once that's done, though, when you start looking at those HA pools, you can say, well, let's upgrade the standby server first, right? The active servers are still there. So once the main server and database come back online, we should still be able to start pulling the data. We upgrade the standby. Once it's upgraded and on a newer version, then we're going to automatically initiate a failover and take an active server, bring it down to standby, promote the standby back to active, and then we upgrade the new standby server. And we're kind of leapfrog through an environment in that fashion. And that's where HA is going to play a bigger part in that story. And so the total time for an upgrade might actually be slightly longer because of that leapfrog approach, but the amount of downtime will have shrunk as part of that. And so that allows customers to have tighter visibility during upgrades as they do it, and they can kind of see that and they watch. Another big item was kind of recurring maintenance windows. There's been ways to do kind of that repetitive maintenance window. It hasn't been super popular, and sometimes it requires a high amount of configuration to get there. Sometimes customers will go maybe just directly to an API and use a different tool to schedule it, but we're actually going to be bringing a recurring maintenance scheduler into the platform, just right in the UI, where you can actually build particular schedules on, like a daily, a weekly, monthly type of frequency. And then you'll be able to assign entities that are, that already have the ability to say unmanage or mute alerts today. And you can say, I'm going to actually attach these to a particular schedule, and then say, we're going to patch our servers once a month on this particular, third Thursday, whatever that ends up being. You could actually say, now we'll just automatically bring those devices into maintenance mode. Maybe we'll just mute alerts. Maybe we'll unmanage, but that becomes an automatic approach at that point. And so that's going to be awesome to just have that ability to, in the tool that's just native supported, it'll just work, which so far, the feedback that we've gotten is great. We're going to expand the AI ops and kind of automation story. A lot of that kind of deals in two parts. One kind of looking at the core architecture of AI ops and what improvements we can make there to make sure that we can be agile. We can iterate through different things. And then the second part becomes, what entities in the platform that we support. So right now we can have a couple golden metrics that we work through, and we're going to look at expanding those types of metrics to other entities. Interfaces is probably the most popular one that we hear across our customer base. That's top of list for us. There's others though that we're looking to kind of expand to. Continue just device expansion and support. So more devices, more API monitoring, better S&P support across all vendors, including PoE data for switches going to be brought in. For a security perspective, we're doing GMSA support. That's right now lined up to come in our 2025.2 release. So for those on with Windows in their environment and have maybe requirements around password rotations or a certain level of security, now GMSA will be an option to pull and monitor your Windows servers. And then from that TCO, we spent a great deal of time on the back end, right? The polling engine scalability, high availability, how that all works. We're kind of looking at how do we start looking at the front end of the platform. How can we improve both the web server? How many concurrent users can be logged into that web server at any particular time? That's one of the areas we've seen a lot of customers grow with over the years, where they have either more users logging into the platform, and they're spinning up multiple web servers. And we're going to say, how can we take that and say, well, before it was X number of web servers, and we're going to increase scalability. And so now either you just have more capacity with what you have, or you could potentially shrink the number of web servers you have because now they cover the same load that the higher number of servers did previously. And then I kind of talked a little bit about reducing downtime during upgrades. That's coming. That's definitely high. And then the engine load balancing is another feature that's been requested over the years, but that's, when I add a entity or a device to SolarWinds, I have to assign it to a particular engine to be pulled through. So what we're looking at now is, if I have this HA pool and I go back to the example of, maybe I have 3 active and 1 standby, when I add a node into the tool, maybe instead of picking a single engine, maybe I'm just picking the pool itself. And then what that would allow us to do is have our software analyze the current load across all the engines in the pool and assign it appropriately to a particular engine. And then as time evolves, continue to look at the load across all those engines and give the ability for users to say, hey, I need a certain, maybe margin of error. I want all of my engines within a certain percentage of element counts or, other factors that are going to be meaningful. And, we're just going to try and make that automatic. So an admin isn't going to necessarily need to go in and rebalance or figure out what's assigned to where. And if I move this, what happens? We want to just take that off your plate, make that easy to work with. So you can just say, hey, I got this HA pool. It's got all these servers. And I just toggle a switch that's going to say load balance these automatically. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that takes us to the end of what we had planned to present. We do have time to sort of have a Q&A. Chad, I know you've been busy presenting, so you haven't really had a chance to follow the chat. I see that it's been very active. Both the chat and the Q&A tab have been very active with questions. I know our staff has been busy answering as many of those as we can. We love that. We encourage you to continue to ask questions, and anything that doesn't get answered, we will capture and we will reach out. Chad, I don't know if you want to just scroll through if there's anything in there that of note that you want to talk to specifically. Well, he's doing that. I will actually go to the next slide and just another little piece of housekeeping. We have our next SolarWinds Day is coming up for North America and EMEA. It's going to be on April 2nd. These are always, I don't know if you guys have attended them or not, but they're always worthwhile. We share a lot of information. We've got some special announcements coming up in this next one, and I would strongly encourage all of you to attend if you can.
Yeah. So Erik, maybe I'll start reading some of these Q&A things that haven't already been answered, and we'll kind of go from there. So one talks specifically around the HA setup, and where you have a lot of devices, a lot of different subnets that are spread out. So there's kind of a network segmentation for security purposes. And, what does that look like when I pull a particular device from that engine, and making sure that the firewall that is going to be securing those subnets recognizes what's what. So from that outbound polling perspective, it's actually a good question. So when you do kind of have the ability to have that one, or I guess many-to-many ratio with HA, or, eventually when you get to the spot where you're doing kind of that automatic load balancing, it does mean you'll have to do an audit of the firewall ACLs, because you will want to make sure that you allow all of the engines that are part of that pool to be allowed through the firewall to pull the device. That's kind of version 1 of our kind of many-to-many HA and load balancing scenario. However, we do have, as part of kind of that longer term roadmap, to create some way to have affinity within a particular entity on a particular engine, so that if there was a particular workload that you needed to make sure was always on one server, we're going to basically try and figure out how can we define that in the tool so that it doesn't automatically get balanced to, say, a different engine, right? You could create that standard that won't follow. That hopefully that answers that type of question, but it is something that's on our radar. For the time being, you'll just have to make sure the firewall ACLs are updated accordingly. There's another one about having custom properties and API pollers. We didn't really talk much about the API pollers in this particular release, but that is a feature request that we can definitely take back. I think that could make a lot of sense. I think there's probably more areas than just API pollers that would make sense to have discussions around, well, can we add custom properties for these? Because there's a lot of power in custom properties in the platform. And so that's great. We'll definitely take that back. And then let's see, another question talked about on the AI ops story, kind of asking if we're looking to compete or get into the space with some of the players like Big Panda and Alert Ops. And I would say we're probably not going to be competitive in those areas. I would say we're probably more complementary, where we'll be able to still do some level of AI ops within our own platform, but understand that that's not the only area that customers are doing AI ops. And so if they have other tooling, definitely they can still use that today. We're not looking to kind of take that space over, but we want to work with that particular tool as well. So if that's something where maybe SolarWinds is looking at particular events, running our own AI ops information, and then we can take particular AI ops events from SolarWinds and pass it over to others so you guys can have a more complete picture. I think that could make a lot of sense. Let me see. What other things do we have? So can you explain the improvements around Aruba? And so this is the one, it's really kind of maybe two-part here. So we took a look at a lot of different Aruba models, looked at, SNMP walks from several of them and said, okay, we covered a good base for Aruba, but, there was definitely room for improvement around making sure unique routing scenarios were covered, hardware health, VLAN data. And so what we looked at is, okay, like Aruba is using their own OIDs to kind of cover those particular things. They have it in their tool, obviously. We just aren't looking in the right spot. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's go make sure that when we add an Aruba device, we now say these are these additional OIDs that we need to check for to start monitoring and get this kind of extra context in there. So that hopefully brings that level of parity up to other players that we have. And we've done that with more than just Aruba too. We've done some others that are there. And then we're hoping to continue that story as well, which is better device support. So we kind of have the adding new vendor model support. And then we also have what current models are there and how can we make sure that both of them, have a certain level of monitoring effects, because sometimes vendors are going to do some unique things with how they have their different own features within their products. And so we're just making sure that we have that coverage there. Looking through if I've missed any.
So there's a couple that have surfaced in our back channel conversation, Chad. Brian was asking, is the summary dashboard shown available in 2024 via THWAC?
So we haven't put it onto THWAC yet. So that the dashboard is on track to come in the .2 release in 2025. So just by upgrading, you should have the ability to switch to that dashboard. That modern dashboard that we showed is kind of the first iteration of the new home summary screen. So we're going to have that out there as an option for customers that would like to switch to it if they already have an existing deployment. And then for a customer that might be installing new, right, that will just be the default home summary page when they log in. So we'll look into see if we can share that out. It's one of those that's actually in active development. So we probably don't have anything today, but I think we'll have something down the road that we can share. Definitely on THWAC.
Awesome. And then another one, do we do Fortinet underlay interfaces?
So the Fortinet, there was, and I might not have all the details. I'm off what I'm remembering. There was something with Fortinet where they didn't expose a certain level of data through SNMP, and it was only via the API itself. I thought that came out in this .1 release. If not, it's coming soon. But it was one of those where when we were kind of looking at that parity story across all the different vendors, Fortinet was one that there was some aspect there that we just couldn't get because they just didn't have it in the SNMP information. And so we had to pivot and kind of, it'll be a hybrid approach, is say we'll have to monitor via both SNMP and API to start getting all the data for Fortinet specifically.
That's all I'm seeing. I know that the team has been very busy responding to the all of the questions, and we really appreciate the the feedback, the interaction. As I hope you're all well aware, we really rely on all of you in terms of our product roadmaps, help guide us. I mean, we really look at the team looks very closely at the feature request page on Thwack, and we're constantly trying to solicit feedback as actively as we can and proactively as we can, because we're doing this for you. This is we want to make sure that whatever we're delivering is going to have value to all of you. So we really do appreciate all of the questions, all of the feedback, and please keep them coming, even obviously beyond the scope of just this one event. At this point, I think we'll just maybe wrap up. And again, I really want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to be with us, and we really do appreciate it. And looking forward to doing more of these with you guys in the future.
Yeah, just thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate it. Hopefully this was informational. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of it, but glad to have you here.
I'll second that. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.